All right, I got Dr. Elena Gross on the show today. She's the founder of Brain Ritual. She's a neuroscientist, PhD in clinical research, and a former chronic migraine sufferer. Elena, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Amazing.
Yeah, I am excited to dive into all things migraines and brain health and neuroscience and some of the new things you're seeing. And we were just talking offline about your product, Brain Ritual, and some of the things. It's not just migraines; it's we're seeing other things and just memory and brain fog and a lot of other things. But migraines is usually how people find you in the first place. But before we go there, talk to me about your story and what were you dealing with all these migraines? Because it's such a multifaceted, there's not just one thing usually for people that causes migraines, but what was the aha moment for you during this journey?
Yeah, so it is really multifaceted, and many people don't know because the phenotype, how it expresses, is fairly similar. So, migraine is like one sided, typically one sided, severe headaches, pulsating, and then you get the light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, even smell and touch can be too sensitive, nausea, all the way up to vomiting. And then in some people, you get this aura phase, which is a phase of visual disturbance where either part of the visual field goes blind or you see zigzag lines, or even all the way to paralysis of half of the body, while finding difficulties. So there's a lot of neurological messing up associated with it, as well as fatigue, other things, brain fog, and so on. And for me, it really started when I was around 14. I had estrogen deficiency, and my gynecologist at the time prescribed the contraceptive pill to me because she said, like, this needs to be more stable, even though that doesn't even have real estrogen in it, right? That's a side story. But half a year later, I remember waking up with these horrible headaches. And my dad was like, oh, come on, just go to sleep, thinking it's a headache, get
Yeah.
over it. It got worse and worse. I remember I could hardly even find, like, crawl to find some pain medication, right? Just some over the counter. It was hard even to do. And then eventually we went from specialist to specialist. Took us about a year to get a diagnosis. And then they told me, well, it's migraine. So this is what it's called. And interestingly, one more quick anecdote is I knew the word migraine before because I'm from Germany originally, now Switzerland. But we have this kids movie called Pünktchen and Anton, where the protagonist's mom has migraine. And the child asks the dad, what are migraines? And dad says, migraines are headaches you don't have. So for about 16 years, right, or whatever it was, 14 years, 10 years, I thought that the definition of migraine is faking a headache because you just can't be bothered, right?
Yeah.
And eventually I realized they're pretty real and they're quite as intense. But then I thought there's like a billion people in the world that have migraines, so common. Surely there's something we can do. But firstly, nobody could really explain to me what migraine is and why it's happening. And secondly, I tried everything on the drug and the alternative side of things. Nothing really helped. It only got worse. So I was always interested in the brain. So I went to study psychology in my first degree. Halfway through my degree, my brain wasn't working. So I had chronic migraine, hardly passed my degree in the end. I mean, I did well enough, but it was a real struggle. And I decided to go into neuroscience to eventually maybe figure out more about what migraines are, why they're happening to so many of us, right? And potentially what we can do about it. And then the good part of the story is when procrastinating in the library, I stumbled across something that, after a lot of trial and error, gave me my brain back, made me understand so much more about migraine than I ever hoped for, and led to a PhD on the topic and even a startup and a product that just launched in the US. So pain turned passion, I guess, really. And now I guess I'm here today to tell people more about how I got better and how they can use that knowledge to get better themselves as the empowered patient, let's say.
I love that. Yeah, I love it because I think for a lot of people, they go to their general, at least in the United States, they go to their conventional Western trained doctor, and it's just simply a way of just band-aiding the situation with
Absolutely.
Tylenol or ibuprofen or some kind of painkiller. And you're left with answers that I don't know. I don't know why you're dealing with this. Maybe it's your diet, maybe it's your hormones, but then there's no real deep dive into what's going on at a root cause, and they just give them pain meds, and it's just terrible.
And that's
What?
the
Yeah.
even the experts, right, on the conferences, they will tell you that, with chronic pain has lost the warning function. And it's a pain disorder. You need to treat the pain. But you so rightly said the pain is the symptom. The pain is the body screaming for help. And I don't believe that even in chronic migraine, pain, I don't think ever loses its warning function. When you're in pain, something is wrong. And we need to figure out what is wrong. And I would go even further. Everybody tries to fight migraine in that sense. But migraine is the fire alarm. Migraine is the warning signal. And what we're doing, and what you said, what GPs are doing because they're helpless or they don't know better, is they're shutting off the fire alarm while the fire is still burning. The house is still on fire. We need to extinguish the fire, and then the fire alarm will stop on its own.
Yeah,
That's how
I
I
love
see
it.
migraine. Migraine is the friend, not the enemy, even though it feels terrible.
Yeah. So if someone comes up to you and says, Dr. Elena, I need you to help me with migraines, where do we start them off with this path? Is there a roadmap or pillars that you like to guide people through and say, let's start here first, then we're going to go here second, and if that doesn't fix it, we're going to go here? Like, is there a roadmap to kind of migraine help? Like, how do you like to take people through that?
Yeah, so first of all, I must say I'm not a medical doctor, so nothing I'm going to say is medical advice. This is more informational purpose only, and I'm talking about my experience and a bit of my research, right? So that just off the bat. But then, yeah, I love this. I love this story. Now, ideally, I would have the time to take very detailed labs and check like what's going on the hormonal side of things, metabolic side of things, oxidative stress, and so on. But say we don't have those options, then I think there's four very important pillars if your metabolism isn't correct. If you have hormonal migraines, and that's fairly easy to distinguish in general, if your migraine always is only at the very beginning of your menstrual cycle, right? That's the so-called menstrual migraine. If you have those, then chances are fairly high that something is wrong with your female hormones. So a bioidentical hormone specialist may be where to turn for help right? There could be metabolic issues as well. But in general, what you want to do is look at metabolism in migraine, even though migraine is believed
Elena,
to be.
can I, before you talk about metabolism, I just want to ask you really quick, because you mentioned women and hormonal cycles, right?
Yes,
Is that why women typically struggle way more than men with
that's
migraines?
a great question. And I think indirectly, yes, because what we see is that before puberty, migraine in boys and girls is 50-50. There's no difference. After puberty, it's around 3-1 female to male. So there certainly is a hormonal component to it. Now, what I believe though is that it's more a protective thing that the woman is losing. Say for guys, you are lucky that your hormones are stable the whole month. Your testosterone, they don't fluctuate, right? So you have that protective mechanisms of the testosterone the whole month. And estrogen, you guys have estrogen as well and all other things. But with women, unfortunately, in your monthly cycle, hormone levels fluctuate a lot. And we think of female hormones mostly for reproduction, right? But estrogen, progesterone, and so on, they have very strong metabolic and even antioxidant action. And we can see this very nicely when a woman is pregnant. Estrogen and progesterone goes through the roof. And in that time, oftentimes from the second trimester, migraine frequency typically drops drastically. And also, these women feel invincible sometimes. The first trimester is hot, but the second, they feel really good. I don't know how your wife felt when she was in the second and third trimester, right? But then suddenly that sleep doesn't feel so bad anymore. That's the power of the female hormones. And when they go rock bottom, females are more exposed to stressors in general. Anything that you do, work stress, sleep deprivation, psychological stress, chemical stress, toxins, even light stress, too much blue light, all of these things elevate oxidative stress. Now, this links back to metabolism. We come back to that in a second. But estrogen and progesterone can protect you from this. When that is very low in your cycle, you're losing that protection. And then some people get irritated around their menstrual cycle. Some women get pain. Some women get migraine. And in general, most women don't feel as good when they're at or just before their menstrual cycle because they're losing the power of these hormones. And men don't. So I think that makes some diseases more prevalent in women. Partially, there could be other genetic factors, of course, right? But I think it's partially due to us losing that protection that we have during the rest of the months.
So it's a combination of both estrogen and progesterone dipping very low, is what you're saying in the
They're both
cycle.
dipping, yes. Yeah. They
Gotcha.
can be
Because I know,
unbalanced, but yeah, they're both.
or an imbalance. You're saying,
There's also imbalances for some, but in general, it always dips low towards the menstrual cycle. You lose both in that
and
sense.
that's prior to going into the luteal phase, right? It's prior to going into.
Prior to the menses, prior to starting to bleed. So then you bleed, and then everything rises again.
Okay.
And then you
And
start feeling better, right? And then ovulation is like the peak, and then it starts to drop again.
yeah,
And exactly. And then people tend to, if there's an imbalance, right, this can show itself during any part of the menstrual cycle. So if you have an imbalance, you can also feel bad around ovulation. Some patients have migraine around ovulation, not
mm,
too many, but the
yeah,
general dip, I think most women feel that they're worse in general just before and during the first days of the menstrual cycle. And then, of
gotcha.
course, you lose all the iron and whatever, right? That's also a bit stressful. But I think it's mainly also due to the drop because we know the extreme opposite example, which is during pregnancy, later stage pregnancy, where people tend to feel really good. And
Hmm.
that's where these hormones are super high.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
when they're still nursing, right? During nursing, then other hormones are higher. And that's when they also oftentimes feel a bit better still.
Gotcha. Okay, so hormones can be a factor for migraines, but and I cut you off, but it sounds like one of the biggest things that you've noticed and where you would start primarily is metabolism and metabolic health. So
Exactly. That's so
talk.
counterintuitive, and nobody will tell you. Very
I've
few
never
doctors.
heard anybody say this. Yeah.
Exactly. Nobody says. That's why we need to coin this and bring this out in the world. Migraine is partially, it's a neurometabolic issue as much as just a neurological disease, right? So let me just step back a couple of minutes and explain brain metabolism because it's different to the rest of the body. And that's interesting whether you have migraine or not. The brain's energy situation is a very special one because, for one, it's the most energy hungry organ of the brain. 20 to 25% of energy demand, even though it's only 2% of our mass. It's tiny, but super energy hungry.
Yep.
Then most of you probably know the brain is very well protected by something called blood-brain barrier. Now, this means that only very small molecules can actually go into the brain to fuel it properly. And this is glucose. You probably all know sugar. It's lactate, only around when you exercise, which migraine patients usually can't do very well. And modern Western population is not really doing much anymore. And the
Correct.
third one is so-called ketone bodies. We come back to that. It's a small chain fatty acid. The way we live today, that is still produced when a baby is born, and then it basically is not produced any longer. It's the precursor in mother's milk, but as soon as Western babies are put on a normal diet, we don't produce that much anymore. And then the other thing is that the brain cannot store energy, even though it's so energy hungry, because there's a skull around it. There's no space. We can have fat storage around almost any organ but the brain, right? So now we have the most energy hungry organ. We don't have storage. If you have a stroke, if supply from the rest of the body is for some reason impaired, neurons degenerate very quickly, right? That's just it. And then three, not much is getting in. Only three molecules, out of which we only have one around in the Western world. So this almost screams like an energy crisis. So if you are in an energy deficiency, the brain suffers first. Now there's at least one more abnormality with migraine patients. There's a couple more. We see that they can't transport glucose very well sometimes. They cannot utilize or use glucose very well. And also, they don't habituate. Now, what does that mean? So, a migrainous brain, if a person without migraine, say you, Joel, were to look at a white wall, your brain would stop firing as soon as the stimulus isn't changing to save energy, right? Makes sense. Now, you habituate. That's called habituation, and it can save a ton of energy. A migrainous brain does not habituate. That means it keeps firing, even though the stimulus doesn't change, thereby spending a lot of energy. Now, I try to look at things more from an evolutionary perspective. So, if we go back 10,000 plus years, this may have even had an evolutionary advantage because these energy hungry, fast, not habituating brains are active all the time. And every seventh person has those genetics. You're lying around the campfire at night, and then these migraine brains are the ones that are waking up when the tiger arrives, right? Because they don't habituate, they're always active. Now, you put these migraine hyperactive brains in today's world, And they're met in an environment, and it's always gene environment interaction, whether you get a disease or not. These brains are put into an environment where energy availability is very low. Now, you're looking at me skeptically. That does sound odd, considering that we've never had as much food around as we have today, right? There's food everywhere. We're eating all day. Now, what I realized when I was procrastinating in that library and had this huge aha moment, right? And was flicking through Nature magazine on the oldest treatment for epilepsy, was that you can eat enough calorie, you can eat a surplus of energy and starve your brain at the same time. Just because you eat calories doesn't mean those calories get into your cells. And calories aren't all that matters. So here's the thing, we can be eating a Western diet all day long and we can starve our brain. Then the brain signals, I'm starving, so we're eating more of the crap. And then we get obese or we get migraine, right?
Mhm.
So the migrainous brain needs more energy than the healthy brain or the normal brain. Plus, it's put in an environment where energy availability is very low. Now we have to explain why. The way we eat today is we have a lot of empty calories, as you probably know, right? Plus, we're not making ketone bodies anymore, that alternative backup fuel source. So, and then third, calories isn't all that matters. Whether it's glucose, fat, protein, we also need these micronutrients that you might have heard of that were back then. And then at the time, I was thinking as long as I have the calories, the rest doesn't matter. But we
Right.
need vitamins, we need minerals, we need trace minerals, we need antioxidants so that our body can actually use the fuel you eat, the calories, put them inside of the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cells, and turn them into ATP, the energy currency of the body. So it's a bit, let's simplify this a bit more. 10,000 years back, we all were hybrid cars, right? We could use glucose and we could use ketone bodies. We could use the diesel and the electricity, right? We would
Mhm.
either find a plug and recharge, or we would go through a more long-term, like fat storage fuel. Today, we're all only running on glucose. We're all electric cars, right? We need a plug every 2 hours. We run out of energy. We can't go very fast. We don't have an official fuel source anymore. Plus, the rest of the car is kind of broken at the same time. Like we don't have the water, we don't have the oil, which are the micronutrients, to make the engine run properly. And this is so drastic because if you, for example, look at the soil, right? All soils, many soils, monocultures, soils are deprived of the nutrients. If the nutrients aren't in the soil, they're not going to be in the vegetable, they're not going to be in us or in the animals we eat, right? So that's a big issue. Now, you go to the US and you look at the tap water, it's got all sorts of crap in it. And the thing it doesn't have in it is trace minerals and electrolytes anymore. And even if you filter the water, which many do, which is a great first step, you get out the rubbish, but you don't have the electrolytes in there anymore. And electrolytes are essential for neuronal functioning and so on. So, what do I propose, right? I mean, this has been a long monologue, but there's more and more research suggesting from genetics, from nutrients that have been used in clinical migraine trials, from inheritance. So mitochondria, the powerhouses being broken, being passed on from mothers only. There's so much evidence right now from antioxidants that migraine has these metabolic issues. And you said it's a very heterogenic problem, multifaceted problem, which means that my pathways that are broken are different to somebody else with migraine. It's different to somebody else with migraine again, right? But metabolism, if you fix that on a whole, right, or you work on metabolism, you can impact so many different pathways in parallel positively. And that's the powerful message. So now we know that migraine is a metabolic issue at part. Or even if you don't have migraine, but you feel like metabolism, your brain health could benefit from a bit more energy, then the 4 pillars that I tried on myself and developed from observing patients, other patients, and myself, trial and error, can really help. Shall we go through them, or do you have more questions?
Yeah,
Metabolism.
so I was gonna ask you, so metabolism being crucial. So Dr. Elena, what's the solution? Everybody go on the keto diet, or is there other ways that, because you're mentioning ketone bodies being very important and having these two types of fuels, is that we all need to go on the keto diet, or is it just that we need a balance where sometimes we're making ketone bodies and glucose because the brain runs on both, right?
Yes. And it always, it's a very good question. And it always runs on both. This is very important. It's always an and. Because 30 to 40% of the brain's energy demands must come from glucose at all times. And even if you're on the strictest ketogenic diet or you're starving, you will always need to make glucose because it's essential, right? But you're asking the right questions. I absolutely do not think everybody needs to be on a ketogenic diet. I also think that when the system is broken, we need different things to when it's working very well in the first place. So, say if a child is born today with migraine genetics, we put this child in a toxin free, perfect environment with whole foods, all the minerals, nutrients, whatever they need, no contraceptive pill that raises oxidative stress, not too much psychological stress, whatever. They will flourish, I think, and not get migraine on a whole foods diet, a paleo diet kind of thing where they have meat, high quality meat, vegetables, fruit, whatever, maybe even some sourdough bread, right? But if we now fast forward and the system is already broken, we may have to rely on an alternative energy source, at least for a while. May not have to be strict diet, maybe supplemental form, but where it always starts, the first pillar that is so important, migraine or not, is you need to stabilize blood glucose because your brain is dependent on the glucose. So the first pillar is getting your blood sugar stable. How do you do that? Well, that is at least a low glycemic index, whole foods diet. Get rid of the processed sugar, the processed carbs. Go to sweet potatoes, maybe some rice, maybe some whatever tubers. Your fruit, fine. Have it with fat and protein, right? Don't have it isolated so it spikes your blood glucose. And get control of your sleep and your psychological stress. Stress elevates blood glucose, and so does sleep deficiency, right? So there's other things outside of diet, and there's more, right? We don't have time to go into everything,
Yeah.
but there's other things that influence your blood glucose. This is number one, really. This includes psychological stress as well, learning to say no, 80-20 principle, whatever it may be, infections, allergies, all of these can raise blood glucose. So figuring out where you lie there and making sure your brain has and your cells have energy at all times because you don't go into this roller coaster. And that's something that's especially in migraine patients. You eat something that's very high sugar. Your body only senses very high sugar sometimes too late. So then it sends the insulin, which shuttles, that's the taxi driver that shuttles the glucose inside of the cells, right? Now that is coming too late and too much of it. So then you take out too much of the sugar and then you go into hypoglycemia. So you have very low blood sugar. Now you're craving high sugary foods because that's literally an emergency situation. So then the whole thing starts again. And I always say it's a bit like a broken thermostat. So it's either too hot or it's too cold, but it never gets the temperature right. But you want the temperature right. You don't want to sweat and you don't want to be too cold. Same with blood sugar. You want it stable. And if you go to whole foods, you mix it with fats and protein, your glucose will rise less steeply. Your body has time to react and send the right amount of insulin that will bring back the blood sugar where you started and not below. That's number one. And for many, that already does a big difference. Now, the second pillar, you might already be guessing, is actually not the macronutrients, but it's the micronutrients that you need to now turn this glucose or whatever fuel you're offering into energy. And this would be your fat-soluble vitamins, your water-soluble vitamins, so B vitamins, fat-soluble is D, E, A, K, vitamin C. This is your trace minerals. These are things you may have never heard of, molybdenum, boron, those kind of things. This also includes zinc. This includes some other trace minerals that should be in our waters, are not anymore, or in our foods. This includes also magnesium, calcium, potassium, sodium even, right? Electrolytes. Then we have antioxidants like CoQ10 that have good evidence in migraine. We have amino acids like L-carnitine that brings the fatty acids inside of your mitochondria so you can turn them into energy. Very important. There's a deficiency in several patient groups there. So there's many different things. And there's your omega-3s, right? Your fatty acids that are protective and anti-inflammatory. So a lot of stuff. Of course, always amino acids. You need amino acids for everything. So especially for vegans and vegetarians, that one is important. And so that's pillar 2. This would be the right supplementation. And I would say always look for human identical. So there's so many cheap supplements out there that just sell inactive versions or not human identical version of these molecules. I didn't know there was even a difference between a B12 and a B12, but
Mhm.
there absolutely is. So for example, cyanocobalamin is the most used B12. It contains cyanide. It can be converted to cyanide in your gut, which is even toxic. So not even are you is it neutral, but it can even be worse than not taking it in the first place for sensitive individuals. So watch out. Bioactive, ideally bioidentical, which would be human identical. So you don't just make expensive pee, but you can actually use what you're absorbing, ideally.
Yeah.
Pillar three is now antioxidants and oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is the number one factor that makes us age. It's increasing inflammation. It's these bombs, free radicals that whatever they touch, they destroy. Whether it's your DNA, whether it's enzymes, whether it's your mitochondria. So you really need to watch out for oxidative stress. It's also the common denominator amongst all migraine triggers, whether it's exercise, fasting, not sleeping enough, alcohol, all of these elevate oxidative stress. So, how do you reduce oxidative stress? You need to look out for toxins. Toxins are ubiquitous in today's world. So, toxins that would include watching out for your water, hygiene products, cleaning products can be very toxic. And we don't know perfumes can be toxic, and it's a very common migraine trigger actually.
Mm.
Perfumes are not controlled, so about 50% of perfumes do have toxic substances in it. And because you are breathing them in through your nose, in your nose, actually, fun fact, is the only place where the blood-brain barrier is broken, so it can go straight into the brain. So that's one.
Wow.
So these odors is one thing to really watch out for. Perfumes is the new smoking. I want to say that right now, that right there. All these odorants, I know that all of these companies are working on bringing new odor molecules that are sticking around even longer for like 24 hours. Anything that smells for 24 hours, that is most likely toxic, right? So watch out for your washing liquids. Normal smells go away, right? If you have essential oils, they don't smell for forever. Natural smells do fade. That's just how it is. Everything else is tied to toxic systems that try to keep the smell in the air or on your clothes or your skin for longer, but it has usually consequences. All right. So
Dr.
reducing
Elena,
also,
really quick. Okay. I never
yeah,
thought about that. What you just said is really a big deal.
it
You
is
said
a
that,
completely big deal.
yeah, yeah. And I never thought about this because one of my questions I was going to ask you that I was dying to ask is, when we talk about your body not being able to get these nutrients,
Mhm.
and this goes back to pillar one when you were talking about the body not be able to assimilate these nutrients, even if we're getting a lot of food, we might even overeat. And I
Yeah.
was thinking, you thought I was looking at you perplexed that I didn't believe you. That wasn't the case. I was actually thinking, I'm wondering how much these neurotoxins have to correlate with migraines, and do these
Yeah.
neurotoxins create some barrier around the cells so that they don't absorb things that they normally could absorb, like some of these beautiful micronutrients that you're talking about. And now and so I am curious about that, but then also to your point, you just said that these toxins that we can just inhale through the olfactory nerve or through
Mhm.
our nose, so something is we don't even think it's a big deal, like VOCs and all these things, these chemicals that are sprayed. It's a big deal then
It's a super big deal.
because it can pass the blood-brain barrier. So that's
Exactly.
huge.
And all neuropsychiatric issues are on the rise, whether it's autism, whether it's depression, whether it's, I don't know, ADHD, whether it's Alzheimer's, all of these things are increasing every year drastically, right? So our neurons are really, well, they have a lack of things, and there's things that are too much of. And we have deficiencies also. If you are inflamed, if you have toxins, you also have a higher demand, right? Because you now need to build more enzymes that can try and detox things. You need to try and extinguish the fire of all the inflammation, right? So yes, maybe in the gut especially, we also have broken guts. I mean, these things don't stop in the gut. So we also have definitely decreased absorption. I'm sure of that. Now, once things are in the brain, getting it out is very hard, right? You're not going to get it out through the nose.
Yeah.
You're getting it in through the
Yeah.
nose,
Yeah.
right? But that's not how it's leaving the brain, right? So you need to try and get it through the blood-brain barrier, try to detox it very hard, very hard. And nobody is regulating. I mean, even the things we're eating and the tap water are, let's say, poorly regulated.
Right.
But anything that smells, because people don't think of this, is literally like not regulated, which means that companies want to sell more. What are you selling more of? A thing that smells for 24 or 48 hours, that people go and leave their job and they're still smelling like they were just out of the shower, right? That's what sells, but people don't realize what's at stake.
Yeah.
And we have more and more another symptom that is also correlating with migraine. It's this multiple chemical sensitivity syndrome. And I have this to a small extent, which is literally people cannot be in any room where there's any smell. It's terrible for them. They cannot think anymore. Their brains are filled with these toxic, and they're highly, highly sensitive. So they're the canaries in the coal mine. And even me, I struggle when I'm in the tube. I mean, you don't have public transport as much, and people that are full of perfume come in. I really get sick. This is why I
So
still
do I.
carry a mask.
Yeah.
I put a mask on and I try to shield myself. And now I know that what it does. I mean, sometimes I wish I didn't know, because now
Yeah.
I'm like, oh God. But I always feel like people need to be informed, and then they can make an informed decision. They can opt for perfumes that have natural ingredients, that are not the standard ones, that don't have the formaldehyde or whatever else might be in there. They can opt for maybe organic or natural sources of their washing liquid, or especially if they have kids. Kids are so vulnerable still, right? So that you can make better choices if you know that's even a thing. And most people don't know. They feed their kids organic vegetables, and then they have this softener that they put on the clothes that smells for 48 hours. And that's
Hmm.
basically giving their kids toxins over 48 hours that they're breathing that in, right? And then it
Wow.
depends on the genetics of the child. Some children can detox very well, and some children cannot. And that might be the ones that then get ADHD. I mean, this is far fetched,
Mhm.
right? And I don't want
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
dramatize, but it depends on gene environment interaction. And I just want to say that less toxins is always for a better environment. And this brings
Yeah.
us back to pillar 3, which is, what can you do now? You want to decrease the oxidative stress that is coming into your system. This is also by learning to say no. Very important. Migraine patients are perfectionists. They take on too much. Nobody can handle it, right? Listen to your body. Get rid of toxic relationships. Just because you were friends in childhood, school, whatever, doesn't mean you're still good for each other now, right? So really make a choice. Who's a net positive, right? Which relationships give you something, and which relationships take all the time, and then make that hard choice of turning to people that feel good for you, right? All that stressors increase oxidative stress. We think of stress as purely psychological, but toxins, physical stress, overtraining, very bad. You don't grow. You need to stay in your hermetic window of growth. That is the window where you can tolerate the stress and you can be stronger after. If you're outside of the window, you will get weaker. You will get sick. So you need to strengthen your antioxidant system. Now, the good news is most of us, mine are mutated, but I still have some, have antioxidant enzymes that will catch the bombs, right? And we need to do something to make them stronger. And how can you do that? Well, there are antioxidants you can take that have been shown to be beneficial in migraine. This could be, for example, the CoQ10. This could be maybe heart, some organs, which we sometimes still eat over here in Europe, not as common in the US, I think. And then it's about, for example, sulfurous vegetables that will help you with those thiol groups, anything that kind of smells a bit like, cauliflower, broccoli. These things have sulfur in it. Sulfur will help make antioxidants. Glutathione, for example, is an endogenous antioxidant molecule. And then you want to have the coenzymes that we again at the micronutrients. You will want to have the manganese and the other trace minerals that the enzymes need to work. That's pillar 3. That's a big one for
Yeah.
longevity in general, but also for migraine. That's why alcohol is a big trigger. That also increases oxidative stress. So if you have alcohol, I would always recommend have it after a meal. Very simple, then it's absorbed slower, you have energy while you're drinking, and then it can be fine, right? Too much alcohol, especially on an empty stomach, is probably not such a good idea. And then pillar 4, now if none of this helps, then maybe you actually do need an alternative energy source for the brain, at least for some time. And this is now where ketone bodies would enter the scene. This can be done, as you already said. Many people in the US probably have heard of the ketogenic diet, which is a very strict fasting mimicking diet where about 80% of your calories come from fat, and then you have 20 or so coming from protein and about 5 from carbs. And your body doesn't know, is it metabolizing its fat stores or is it coming from outside? And you turn on these fasting mechanisms, right? So that is one way. Now, more recently, luckily, there's also been the possibility to exogenously add ketone bodies. And there I just want to say, as a patient, there's two major classes. One is ketone body salts. Ideally, again, human identical, they're bound to minerals, which is generally a good thing anyway, in case of migraine, to increase magnesium, sometimes even sodium. And then you have ketone esters. Ketone esters, not all, but many, you need to watch out for because they're bound to an alcohol backbone. So you have a ketone body molecule, and then you have butanediol, which is an alcohol. You bind them together, you have 50% alcohol and 50% ketone bodies. Alcohol for migraineurs who already have a sluggish, struggling liver from all the medication overuse generally is not a good idea. And if you want to know about it, right? So watch out. We've seen signs of liver getting much worse in many instances. So that's just something to be aware of. And
Interesting.
I don't
Yeah.
know if I'm allowed to say, so I created a product that it helps or is intended to help with all 4 of these pillars to make it a bit more easy. We have the beta hydroxybutyrate mineral salt in there and a lot of different micronutrients from the fat soluble, water soluble vitamins, antioxidants, CoQ10, L-carnitine, some ketogenic amino acids, and the ketone body to support this dietary migraine management. So it's to support metabolism in migraine, basically. So it's a medical food that's something between a supplement and a drug. It's basically grass generally recognized as safe ingredients, but against or in support of a disease, not for healthy people with clinical trials behind it. So that I created to just be sure that it's the top-notch ingredients and basically that I have something that I can be taking. It can be done without this. I don't want to plug any specific product, but we've learned or we've seen that especially in patients where liver function isn't going very well, a strict ketogenic diet can be hard because most of the ketone bodies are manufactured in the liver. So if your liver is struggling, it can in the long run be stressful. And we've talked about the difference between women and men. Also, a very strict ketogenic diet at some point because it mimics fasting and starvation in that sense can lead to a stop in the period so that people are no longer bleeding or that thyroid hormone production goes down. So in the end, what we want to get to, I think, eventually is to a state where we're 10,000 years back, which is there was periods in winter where we wouldn't have carbs. We could easily switch to ketone bodies when we only had meat or fat. And then when there was fruit around or we had carbs, we could easily switch to the glucose metabolism. So that's what you said very early on, is this metabolic flexibility, which we are born into, most of us, which we completely unlearn. And I think the biggest thing is also with these 4 pillars, whether you do it with diet, a bit of support, or however else you are choosing, is that we eventually get to a state of metabolic flexibility, that our brains and bodies remember what ketone bodies are, molecules that they've last seen basically when we were born. So for me, it was over 2 decades that I've not had ketone bodies present much at all. I know that some people make more even when they eat carbs. This could be the difference between people that metabolically struggle in today's world and some that have more adapted. But it's really essential that we have redundancy. You wouldn't build an airport without a second power supply, right? Because if one thing goes wrong, it will crash. We
Yeah.
are setting ourselves up for non-redundancy. If the glucose is out, that's it, right? We need to we need to have redundancy again. That's an engineering principle. So that means metabolically flexible, as you said. Now, ideally, in a healthy human, I would say no strict ketogenic diet, metabolic flexible, maybe omit a meal one day, maybe have less carbs one day, or have I don't know, a keto breakfast. You go for the eggs and maybe bacon or a steak or whatever during the day, and then you have the carbs in the evening, so that we are flexible around this. I know migraineurs can hardly fast, even on a ketogenic diet, but at least getting the body accustomed and giving the brain ketone bodies some time, I think is a way forward for many of us.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you were saying if the other three don't work, those three pillars, if we've gotten this far and we're still haven't
Yeah,
got those symptoms resolved, many
yeah.
oftentimes getting someone on a ketogenic diet is usually what that's pillar four, and that usually
But
pushes
even a
them.
ketogenic diet, right? As you say, like if you are on a ketogenic diet that is full of processed foods and no micronutrients on its own, it won't work either, right?
Right.
So it needs to be, we need to still tick off the first three
Why
pillars.
does why does the ketogenic diet in your why does it work so well for migraines when the brain, I understand there's the flexibility that it switches back and forth with fuels, but at the end of the day, the brain primarily runs off of glucose, correct?
Primarily today, depending on, it can take up to 60%, maybe even 70% of its energy from ketone bodies. So it can take the majority from ketone bodies if there are enough. I mean, exogenously, that will be hard. But
Yeah.
if you're starving, for example, even on a ketogenic diet, it's mostly hard as well. But if you're starving, I think it can be as much. And it may be that, for a severe migraine patient, they actually need those ketone bodies for a couple of years. What we see in epilepsy is that after two to 4 years of a strict ketosis, strictly having ketone bodies around all the time, they can stop it completely. And
Mm,
the efficacy stays around. For me, interestingly, it took 2.5 years actually. Before I would stop, it would always come back. For me, it was always a more low carb and adding exogenous at the same time. But I needed to do that religiously for 2.5 years. And after that, now I just take it occasionally when I have extra stress or,
mm.
just because I know I'm doing myself good. But the migraines, I had 20 plus a month and now I'm down
Wow.
to one. And I know what happened. I mean, it's warning me. If I have a jet lag and I'm working too much and I don't eat regularly and I didn't have much sleep, it still comes on if I haven't listened and says, hello, you're destroying yourself.
Yeah.
Please slow down, And then I'm like, okay.
The life of a founder, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And then
Yeah.
I do have to then I do also take modern medicine. I do take triptans or painkillers because we all have to live and survive and, have a job and whatever, right? So I'm not against modern medicine at all. I'm just saying that if you need to take something every day, if you extinguish or if you turn off the fire alarm every day, that's not the way to go. So
Yeah,
if we're
100%.
thinking of prevention, that's, I think, where I would rather turn to human identical, more natural solutions that have less side effects, right? So
Yeah.
that's why I opted for a more drug-free solution for long term. And I want to say it won't work for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So there's different root causes for migraine. Fixing metabolism is always generally a good idea for brain health. But if you have hormone deficiency or disbalance, or you're full of toxins, or there may be other things that are going wrong, right? That you won't be able to solve with that. So I want to be full transparent, but I think it's worth a try.
Yeah, no, that's great. Why, and then just because I'm curious, why is ketone body so healing for the brain if the brain primarily runs off of glucose? Why do we find
Good
these?
question.
Yeah.
It's so healing. If you think back from evolution, right, 10,000 years back, when was our brain needed to be on the number one top performance?
When we needed to get food after starving for so long.
That's when we're starving and we need to get food. That's as simple as that, right? If you think about all cultures, what have they all together? All religions.
Yeah,
They
they
all
always have some type
come
of
together.
fasting process. Yeah.
And in the fasting, that's where they come closest to God. Maybe they're just
Mm,
in ketosis and the brain lights up. So yes, mechanistically, we can say that ketone bodies are actually, they're antioxidants, very strong antioxidants.
wow.
And they also produce less oxidative stress when they're burned, which is great for migraine, great from longevity. Then they're anti-inflammatory. They reduce inflammation. They increase the building of new mitochondria. They can improve, at least in a ketogenic diet, the gut microbiome, which is a factory for substances that the brain needs, right? They reduce hyperexcitability. We talked about epilepsy and the lack of habituation. These brains are hyperexcitable. Ketone bodies can calm down the brain, which could also be important for things like bipolar or ADHD, potentially depression. More research is needed, but from a mechanistic perspective, they have so many different pathways that they could potentially positively impact. which is why I think they can be very healthy for the brain in general. And
Yeah.
also just because they needed to, right? I mean, our sheer survival as a species would depend on us being on our top brain performance when we're starving. We wouldn't outrun the tiger. We need to outsmart the tiger, right?
Right. Right.
So there you go. Good question.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. And I know we have to wrap things up here in a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Your product, Brain Ritual, I do want to plug it because I know you didn't come on this product, the show to just plug product. We're educating everybody here, but this is really then the compilation of your research and everything that you've learned and saying, hey, we're knocking down. I mean, you're pretty much hitting all those pillars. This product can't remove neurotoxins from the brain, but because you're getting the more you're upregulating antioxidants through Brain Ritual, you're going to get that effect. Can you just talk a little bit about Brain Ritual and just kind of how it? I mean, you already kind of talked about that, but just what are some of the things that you're seeing with people in either in research or just anecdotally? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing with folks?
Yeah, and that was really quite surprising. So, brain ritual was designed to be a ritual for your brain, something you need to take every day, right? But what we've seen one is that several patients have reached out to say it worked acutely. So they took it for either headache or a migraine acutely and got better. We had a medical doctor, really reach out and say that it even reduced fever. Now, this is just a one off, right? I'm just saying we had somebody with bipolar getting better. We had someone with depression getting on all antidepressants. Those are individual cases. I don't want to make any medical claims or put hopes out
Right.
there. But we had somebody during pregnancy that got rid of not only headaches and migraine, but also nausea that was associated. That's often there during pregnancy. Just yesterday, so it's quite amazing. We got somebody with diabetes getting off all diabetes medications because her blood sugar was dropping so low, with her probably metabolism improving, right?
Wow.
So this just says that if you optimize metabolism and you get rid of deficiencies that you may have and support brain function in general, many crazy things that we never expected can happen, right? So I also want to say for your listeners, Joelle, your name,
Yeah.
we'll give them a $55 discount
Wow.
if they want to try. So we can put that in the show notes if you like.
I will put that in there. Yeah. That's huge. Thank you.
Also love to send you a box if you wish, so you can try yourself.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. We've had some kids also take it, although we didn't. I must say we didn't do pregnancy trials, and there's no trials in kids. But since the ingredients are human identical, some parents have chosen to try this over pain medication with quite some good results. So yeah, I'm very excited to see where it brings us. But as a startup, a small startup, it's always hard to get enough marketing dollars to spread the word. So I'm very, very grateful to you to let us spread the news. The box still looks like this. Even the product is called Brain Ritual now. Migraine against migraine. If you are curious, and we would always love to hear how you're doing on it. And it needs to satisfy me, and I'm the most critical consumer. So
Yeah.
it's uh, it's got many things you need, and hopefully nothing you don't. So that's the goal.
Yeah. And, I looked through the nutrition label and everything in there. It's a very solid product. And yeah.
And you don't need your multivitamin unless your doctor says so. This is in replacing a multivitamin, your daily multivitamin as well.
Yeah, it 100% will. You've got all the bioavailable forms of the ingredients, like the B vitamins and everything that you mentioned,
The
and then you've
methylated
got the additional, the add-on of the antioxidants, and obviously the ketone bodies is huge. So,
yeah.
really cool stuff that you're doing,
Thanks so
and
much.
yeah, really excited for that. And I would imagine, yeah, for kids it would work. I have 2 kids, and I would imagine if there's learning disabilities and things like that, a lot of kids have methylation issues that they don't even know
Yes.
about, and micronutrient issues because of the processed
Yes.
food they're on, and they for sure have glucose excursions and swings, which we see a lot of anger and emotional things. So I would
Yes.
really imagine for kiddos, if you're out there, your parents and listening, and you're looking for just a strong multivitamin coupled with
With
some
the
of the
additional ketones, right? With the
correct.
additional energy for the brain, because there's so much we put on our kids in school now. They need to perform 24/7, little playtime.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is going to be a really nice if any of the parents are listening, they're looking to like replace something for their kiddos, this would be a solid replacement for a multivitamin, given the additional stuff that you're getting in there. So
Oh,
yeah,
thank you.
love
Yes.
this. Love
If
what
you
you're
are
doing.
experimenting, tell us how you're doing or how your kids are doing. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk offline. Dr. Elena Gross, this was amazing. Talk to us where, I know you've already kind of mentioned it, but where can people just connect with you
Yeah.
and the good folks at Brain Ritual if they want to learn more either about Brain Ritual or just all the exciting work and research that you're up to?
Yes, I'm Dr. Elena Gross on all social medias, actually YouTube as well. I have a website, drelenagross.com, where you can download a free mastering migraine paper on a lot of the things that we just discussed, the 4 pillars. I made actually a free YouTube course with 10 videos, bite-sized, up to 15 minutes, that explain what is metabolism, what are mitochondria, what is oxidative stress and inflammation. So you have all the terminology to do your own research, and also again summarizing the 4 pillars. So if you want to learn a bit more or get a bit deeper, please go there. Absolutely free. You can spread the word. Sharing is caring here. Let's empower some more patients. And then it's Brain Ritual or Migra and Keto on the website and also on the social medias where you can reach out. My team, or I would love to hear from you if you want to reach out via my website or on Instagram or elsewhere. Please do. And yeah, let's fuel some more brains to help reclaim some lives. That's the goal.
Let's do it. Dr. Elena Gross, founder of Brain Ritual. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so
Appreciate you.
much for having me. It was great. Bye, Joel.